This lovely manhwa is titled My Prince Fiancé in Name Only Actually Loved Me. If you love stories like this, please like and subscribe. It helps us a lot. She got stripped of her position as the Duke's daughter and was replaced by her cousin. Today was supposed to be the engagement celebration for the country's prince. At least that's what she thought. But on the very same day, the prince, Alexander, broke off his engagement with Lady Dolores Suspalib right in front of everyone with his own hands. Dolores froze in shock as the prince, Alexander, pointed at her angrily, his beloved standing proudly beside him, declaring that she had oppressed and hurt his precious woman, a grave sin. Dolores clenched her dress in pain as the crowd turned on her, calling her a liar and cursing her relentlessly. On this day, her fiancé, His Highness Alexander, loudly proclaimed her condemnation for all to hear. But before all this, back in the Duke's mansion, the young lady scolded a maid, calling her a fool for ruining the soup. The maid apologized sadly and went down to pick up the broken plates. This young lady, dressed like a maid, is Dolores Suspalib. As she reached for a plate, it cut her, and she twitched, thinking to herself that she was neither Dolores nor the daughter of the Suspalib ducal family anymore. The young lady yelled at her, mocking that she couldn't even carry a single dish properly. Dolores, in tears, apologized again, carefully packing up the plates piece by piece. Her eyes widened in shock when the door opened. It was the Duke and Duchess, their expressions cold, demanding to know what the commotion was about. Seeing her on the floor, the Duchess called her filthy, while the young miss stood up angrily, complaining to her parents that this fool was acting clumsily again and couldn't even carry food properly. Dolores couldn't say a word. The Duke lamented, asking what kind of education his brother even gave her. The Duchess rushed to her daughter, worried if she was all right. Dolores knelt there silently, watching it all unfold. A wave of sadness washed over her as she thought about why her parents had left her alone in this world. She imagined that if only the accident 5 years ago hadn't happened, the Duke and Duchess Suspalib would still be alive. Back then, she had cried her eyes out that night, calling desperately for her parents. If only they hadn't died, she would still be the daughter of a prestigious ducal family. Everything changed when her father's twin brother and his wife arrived. Her aunt and uncle, along with their daughter Dory, came to the mansion and took over everything. Her father and uncle were twins, so they looked almost identical, and naturally, she and Dory looked alike in a similar way. The moment they stepped into the mansion, the first thing they did was fire all the servants and replace them with new staff. They literally took everything away from her. Dory became Dolores Suspalib, the Duke's daughter, the position that had always belonged to her. Meanwhile, she was stripped of her name and title, becoming a nameless servant. Even the other maids mocked her for acting strangely. The truth was, none of them knew her real her. No one in the mansion even knew her name. She longed desperately to return to the days when she had been happy with her parents. Back then, when she first went to the palace, she excitedly told them about encountering a boy in the palace who seemed to be in pain. When she saw him, she was surprised, and so was he. It seemed he was about to cry, but she gently patted his back, telling him it was all right, making sure he felt better. The boy, with silver hair, had been so happy to have her company, feeling comfortable with her presence. If only she could go back to the days when her life was perfect. When her mother heard her talking about the boy, she asked curiously. Dolores asked sadly if she wasn't supposed to talk to any boy she didn't know. Her mother smiled, saying it wasn't that she couldn't talk to boys, but she should remember she had a fiancé. Dolores nodded sadly, explaining that the boy had been sick for a while and had no friends, so she had volunteered to be his first friend. Back then, he had asked who she was, and Dolores had gladly introduced herself as Laura. Though her real name was Dolores, she was often called Laura, so she told him that name without thinking. Her mother had softly touched her head, reminding her that due to the permission between the royal family and the Susbelib Ducage, His Highness Alexander was her future husband. Dolores had pouted, complaining that they had never met. Her mother was surprised to hear her protest. Little Laura added that he didn't even write her letters, so how was he her fiancé? Her mother had worriedly told her she mustn't speak like that. Back then, and even now, the prince was nothing to her but a fiancé in name only. In the end, His Highness Alexander had only sent a letter expressing his condolences when her parents died, and had done literally nothing else for her. Laura groaned, scratching at the wound on her while washing plates. Looking around, she sadly thought to herself that even now, he probably didn't even know what kind of life she was living. Just then, a voice shouted from behind, "I heard you broke another dish." Turning, she saw the head maid glaring at her, calling her clumsy in the most annoying way. Laura apologized, trying to explain that it had been because of the young lady. The head maid, holding up one of the plates she had washed, snapped, "How dare a clumsy girl like you make excuses?" Laura's heart sank as the head maid yelled again, pointing out that the dishes were filthy and she had to wash them all over again. The maid turned and left, and Laura sulked, thinking to herself that it had been the same endless cycle every single day. It was night, and Laura finally finished her work for the day. She went to her room, which was pitch black, and collapsed onto her bed, pulling the thin blanket tightly around herself. She wondered if days like this would stretch on endlessly. She squeezed into the light blanket, shivering from the cold, when suddenly a splash of icy water poured over her. She jumped up, startled, and found herself staring at Dory, grinning mischievously with a bucket in hand. Finally awake, Dory teased. Laura, soaked from head to toe, could only glance at her in shock. Dory, full of energy, shouted about how she would soon debut in society. Laura frowned, confused, wondering where all this was heading. Suddenly, Dory grabbed her roughly, demanding your fiancé should be His Highness Alexander. Then why isn't he responding to all my letters? This is so funny. Posing as Dolores Susbelib, she wants the prince too? I'm so satisfied he isn't responding to her. Laura didn't know what to say, but Dory blamed her anyway. "Have you done something to make His Highness hate you?" she yelled. Laura replied anxiously, "I don't even know what His Highness the Prince looks like." Dory's anger only grew. "Then how do you intend to make it up to me? With no fiancé to escort me, I'll be a laughingstock." Laura frowned coldly and asked, "Yet to give it back then?" Dory froze, shocked to hear this lowly servant daring to ask for her position back. She shoved Laura aside and turned toward the door. Before leaving, she glanced back and sneered, "I'll be definitely happier than you." Laura sat there drenched and pitiful when suddenly her head spun. Before she could react, she collapsed to the ground. The next day, Laura served as usual, though exhaustion weighed heavily on her. Dory arrived, smiling brightly, holding news that a message had arrived from His Highness Alexander. Laura watched silently as the Duke and Duchess happily announced that the prince had finally replied, agreeing to personally escort her and introduce her as his fiancée. The Duchess could hardly wait to begin preparations for the society debut. Everyone turned to Laura, who was still in shock. Her fiancé in name actually existed, it seemed. The engagement had been real all along. Watching Dory, she couldn't believe that Dory would be the one to actually marry the prince. On the day of the engagement party for the Duke's daughter, Dory Susbelib, and Prince Alexander, Dory appeared dressed elegantly, looking breathtaking. When Laura entered, she asked, "Did your lady call me?" Dory turned, and Laura stared sadly. Her lady grinned, teasing, "How do I look? Are you jealous?" Laura could only remain silent. Dory smirked. "Frustrated, you can't even say a word, huh? Showing off your happiness to me like that, what exactly do you want?" Laura asked, her voice trembling. "Do you hate me that much?" Dory grabbed her suddenly, anger flashing in her eyes. "Isn't it obvious?" she snapped. She didn't hesitate to say it to her face. She hated her. Laura looked at her surprised. Dory shouted angrily about how everyone used to fawn over her just because she was the Duke's daughter. She even got engaged to the prince, and though it was an arranged engagement, she still didn't deserve it. She added that their fathers were not only brothers, but twins, and that made her feel sad while Laura was happy. On every occasion when she had to hide herself, Laura always appeared, smiling and looking extremely happy. Why? 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 Why is it? Dory shouted, demanding to know how a slow-witted woman like her could get so much happiness. Seeing how much Dory had hated her since childhood, Laura couldn't contain her own feelings anymore. She fell to the ground, and Dory chuckled mischievously, mockingly apologizing in a teasing tone. Before leaving, she taunted her further, mocking her for not having enough clothes now, which serves you right, she said. Now you have to stay there and watch me become happy with your thumb in your mouth. Sitting on the ground, Laura realized that with all this happening, it was obvious her position had actually belonged to Dory from the start, and her own existence would likely disappear entirely. Later that night, Laura stayed in her room by candlelight, thinking to herself that by now the party would have started at the royal palace. Remembering that the engagement party was at the palace, she thought about how long it had been since she went there and played with her father. She also remembered the boy she had met at the palace, whose name was Rex. She wondered if he had grown up too and whether he would attend the party as well. Just then, her door opened. She looked up to see a maid entering. It was Susanna, carrying a cup on a tray. Laura called out in confusion, and Susanna explained it was cold, so she had brought her a cup of tea. Laura was surprised, and Susanna smiled warmly, watching her carefully. She handed her the cup and urged her to drink quickly to warm herself. I find this Susanna girl very suspicious. Why'd she suddenly bring tea and push our girl to drink? While drinking, Susanna pointed out that her clothes were a disaster and suggested she sew them for her. Laura smiled, thanking her for the tea, but her vision suddenly blurred. Susanna's smile turned cruel as she said the young lady had ordered her to do this, and she knew how tough it would be for both of them. Before she knew it, Laura didn't feel like herself anymore. She shivered, wondering what this sick, strange feeling was all about. Susanna smiled, telling her that once the young lady made her debut, it meant Laura had served her purpose. Struggling to stay on her feet, Laura asked in panic, "What do you mean?" Susanna pulled out a small bottle of liquid, saying she had been told to dispose of her. Laura froze in shock and immediately began coughing nonstop. "Don't think badly of me," Susanna continued. "If you have any grudge, blame your own fate." She locked Laura in the room and left. Laura called out for help, but she couldn't speak. She couldn't catch her breath. When she finally passed out, she woke to a completely changed environment. She sat up, panting, confusion and fear flooding her mind. "Why am I here? I was just poisoned by Susanna," she thought. Glancing down at her clothes, she noticed they weren't worn. Dory had torn them before. She blinked, trying to make sense of it. Time had turned back. Meanwhile, in the palace, Rex woke up from sleep and groaned as the sunlight nearly blinded him. Then he smiled, murmuring, "It seems like it was a success." What does that mean? Was he the reason time turned back? Still sitting on the bed, she tried to understand what was happening. Her eyes fell on a box in the corner. She picked it up, searching through it, hoping to confirm that she was truly back in the past. She froze when she saw it, her mother's keepsake. She couldn't believe it. She was back to the time when this brooch was still with her. She remembered clearly her uncle once slapped her and taken it, commanding her to know her place because it wasn't hers to hold. She had begged him not to take it, but he left, knowing full well how much it meant to her. Dory stood by, grinning cruelly. And now, holding it again, Laura clutched it tightly, whispering to herself, "Am I really back in time?" She never believed something like this could happen to someone with such an ill fate. She remembered everything, the reply from the prince saying he would personally escort Dory, the way a single letter had made everyone treat her as useless and silenced her. She trembled as she recalled the sickening feeling of being forced to drink the poison. That definitely was not a dream. Looking at the brooch, she wondered why she had been sent back. While doing her daily chores, she glanced at the date on the newspaper. Half a year ago, she realized no one around her seemed confused by the change in time. That meant she was the only one who had traveled back and still remembered everything. Just then, Dory shoved her from behind and the plate in her hands clattered to the ground. Dory shouted at her for spacing out, and just like before, the Duke and Duchess appeared at that moment. Dory complained as usual, and her parents glared at Laura as a warning. Watching it all unfold, Laura sighed. She was truly back in the past, but not to when her parents were alive and she was happy. If she had been sent back to when she was little, she could have stopped her parents from going on that fatal journey. But here she was again, miserable like before dying. She apologized silently to herself, thinking about it. 6 months from now, the same people would erase her from the world. While cleaning her room, she realized that if she did nothing, history would repeat itself. She looked at the window at the full moon. This time, I'll change the future. She stood up, telling herself with confidence that she wouldn't lose again. Meanwhile, at the Imperial Palace, a servant ran after His Highness, begging him to wait. He reminded him of his terrible seizure last night and urged him to rest. The prince didn't listen, smiling apologetically for worrying him. He stopped and looked out the window, seeing the full moon. "There's something I must do," he said. His servant replied, concerned, "The most important thing right now is your health, Your Highness." The prince smiled again, turning to him. "Kwan, I need you to do me a favor." "Huh? A favor?" the servant asked in confusion. "So that little boy Laura called Rex is actually the prince? That's a real plot twist. Did you see that coming?" Next day, at the Cespaliba mansion, as usual, Dory broke a plate in a fit of anger, shouting, "Why would the prince finally reply to my message with busy? Isn't His Highness my fiancé?" Laura stood quietly in the corner, watching sadly. She pressed her face in her hands, thinking to herself that Prince Alexander's cold treatment didn't start just now. Not only that, he was famous for avoiding social circles. Even as a child, she had doubted his existence. There wasn't a single portrait or record of him anywhere. She had even asked her mother once if he was even alive, only to be shut down harshly. Turning to her father childishly and asked what he thought. He softly told her to listen and understand that Prince Alexander carried something very, very heavy. Laura calmed down, her father adding that she could help His Highness bear his burden. Laura wondered if the heavy things her father spoke of were the reason the prince was always busy. Back in her room, Laura was shocked at how little money she had. With this little, even if she ran away, she can't afford an inn, let alone food, she thought, anxiously shouting to herself that she mustn't be weak. Fiercely, she knew she had to get out of the mansion. She couldn't let these people silence her again. A few days later, an incident happened in the mansion. Laura was serving food at the dining table when she overheard Dory and her father discussing His Highness's aide sending to the mansion. Dory panicked. "There's no point in his aide coming," she exclaimed. The Duke smiled, trying to calm her down. "Maybe he wants to relay a message from His Highness or something," he suggested. Dory didn't like the idea at all. Laura's heart raced. She couldn't believe His Highness's aide was actually coming, and this hadn't happened in her previous life. Could it be that the future is changing, she wondered? Soon enough, His Highness's aide arrived. The servants lined up alongside the Duke, Duchess, and Dory. Dory tried her best to maintain composure. Kwan stepped out of the carriage, introducing himself as Prince Alexander's aide, Kwan Lavino. The Duke smiled, welcoming him warmly. Laura, lined up with the maids, kept glancing at him as greetings were exchanged. Looking at Kwan, Laura recognized him. She had seen him back at the palace before. He was the legitimate son of the Lovino Marquis family, and now he had become His Highness's aide. "I can't believe it," she thought. "Lady Dolores, do you remember me?" Kwan asked Dory. She looked confused. He explained that he had seen her several times in the past. Dory smiled anxiously, claiming she didn't remember anything. Kwan shook his head, saying it was quite unfortunate. Before she knew it, Kwan stepped closer and Laura panicked. His eyes met hers, already filled with fear. Lady Dolores of the Suspalib ducal family is known for her golden hair like sweet honey and jewel-like emerald eyes, Kwan said, then stepped back, adding, "It's strange. Her eye color looks different now." The Duke and Duchess exchanged nervous glances. Dory, flustered, quickly explained that it was because she had grown up. Kwan chuckled, still curious. Dory smiled nervously, trying to cover it. The Duke and Duchess did their best to stay calm while this unfolded. Watching all this from the side, Laura had to think, How does it feel living someone else's life? Because it's like walking on a bed of needles piled up with painful lies. Suddenly, Kwan's eyes fell in her direction and he noticed her. Laura quickly looked away, her heart pounding. When she dared to look back, he was smiling. Did he really just look at me? She wondered, her nerves tingling. They all sat in the living room and Kwan discussed some official matters with the Duke while Laura sat in a corner serving the snacks. She leaned forward to serve tea and got lost in her thoughts about Kwan's visit, something that never happened in her previous life. She wondered what it could mean. Immediately, she rose and left. Kwan asked the Duke to excuse him and the Duke permitted. "Would Miss Dolores please excuse herself from her seat?" he asked, chuckling. Dory chuckled along, but it was really awkward. Dory stormed back to her room, so upset that she broke things again, shouting angrily, "Why did he even come here if it wasn't to see me?" Laura stood in the corner, speechless. Dory continued shouting that leaving her out like that, even though she was Prince Alexander's fiancée, was rude. Laura wondered, if the aide didn't come to see Dolores, then why did he come at all? Her father appeared a moment later and told her daughter that Lord Kwan had something to say earlier. Dory's face brightened immediately. "Is it a message from His Highness?" she asked eagerly. But her father's expression didn't look like it was good news, and Dory's smile faded instantly. Kwan explained that since the head of the house had passed away and the Duke had become the acting head, he hadn't visited the territory even once. The Duke stuttered, but Kwan chuckled, saying that while the Duke was earnest in his efforts, it would be proper for the acting head to conduct an inspection as well. The Duke had no choice but to agree that he would go at once. He muttered to himself about how inspections were such a hassle, as he didn't have time to listen to the common folks' complaints one by one. Laura stayed still, taking it all in. Originally, after the royal family, it had been the House of Suspelib that managed the territory. The House of Duke Suspelib had been granted lands by the royal family for generations. Under Laura's careful governance, the territory had prospered. But ever since her uncle became acting head, even when disaster struck, they were left unattended and the land fell into ruin. Dory yelled at her father to leave it and not care, but he reminded her that if news of the neglect reached His Highness, it would become a real nuisance. He also made it clear that Lord Kwan must have come on His Highness's orders. Hearing all this, Laura thought to herself that it was now obvious, even after her mother and father passed, he still cared about the state of the House of Suspelib. Dory told her father that since he was insisting on going, she would escort him part way, claiming she had some shopping to do in the territory. The Duke made it clear this was not a pleasure trip. She replied coldly that the inspection had nothing to do with her, but she wanted to do some sightseeing as well. Dory glanced at Laura in the corner, mockingly asking, "Jealous of my freedom?" Laura stayed quiet. Her lady added that she would be going to look for a dress to wear to see His Highness. Dory stood there, thinking sadly to herself that she and the others would be away from the mansion for a while. Laura, however, thought to herself, in fact, she should be thankful to Dory for making this decision. She raised an eyebrow, knowing this was her chance to finally break free. Back at the palace, His Highness, looking out the window, asked Kwan as he entered, "Did you manage to meet her?" "My fiancée?" "No, the fake Dolores," he said, smiling. Kwan smiled too, saying that was quite straightforward. He explained to the prince how he had tried testing both parent and child in various ways, but they didn't reveal any decisive slip-ups. The prince replied, saying one had to be as cunning as them to pull off such wicked deeds. Kwan hesitated, wanting to mention that the Duke's daughter didn't seem educated enough and wasn't fit to be his fiancée at all. Alexander glanced at him coldly. "Forget about the fake. Tell me, was she there or not? Among the servants of the House of Duke Suspelib, the real her," Alexander said. Kwan nodded. She was there, strikingly beautiful, and those eyes, without a doubt, they are His Highness's real beloved. Alexander exhaled with relief. "For now, I'm glad to know she's alive within the ducal household." Then he grew sad. How has she been living like that? How does the prince know all about this, and why didn't he do anything before? What changed? Seeing His Highness saddened, Kwan spoke, but Alexander shouted, reminding him there was no time for sentimentality. He instructed Kwan to reinvestigate the Duke's accident. Kwan was surprised. "Do you mean what you just said?" Alexander softened. "I would have died if I hadn't met her, so no matter what it takes, I want to save her." The next day, the carriage was ready. The Duke and Duchess, alongside Dory, made their way inside. The maids bowed outside, wishing them a safe trip. Laura bowed too. Dory smirked through the window as the carriage moved. Laura coldly thought to herself, tonight is the only chance. With her uncle and the servants spread thin, there couldn't be a better moment to escape. Back in her room, Laura took out her mother's brooch, thinking, the jade color is just like her father's eyes. She smiled, feeling like both her parents were watching over her. She remembered how her uncle had taken the brooch in the past, but now she knew she wouldn't let anyone take it again. She told herself confidently that she would treasure it, and her father and mother would keep protecting her from wherever they were. Laura opened the door slowly and looked out into the quiet hallway. It's usually like this at this hour. Everyone's working, trying to finish so they can go to sleep. She stepped out carefully, thinking to herself that the servants here didn't hold loyalty to her uncle or that young lady. Laura jumped into the garden and crawled quietly to avoid being seen. She peeked out and saw one of the guards at the gate stretching. Immediately, she ducked behind a corner, but she couldn't stay perfectly still. A rustle in the grass gave her away, and the guard called out, "Who's there?" Panic shot through her. What should I do? I might get caught. She decided to make a cat's meow sound as the guard approached. He looked around, confused, wondering if it was really a cat. When he went to check, Laura quietly followed behind and escaped his notice. She reached the gate, which the guard had left unattended, gently pulled it open, stepped out, and closed it behind her. She ran off, excited. I did it! I finally escaped! She thought. She glanced back at the gate and couldn't help but remember her family, how they looked the last time she saw them before the accident. She held the brooch tightly, telling herself, this isn't the time to cry, it's time to move forward. If she ever comes back here, it'll be to take back what they stole from her. Walking through the forest, she knew her uncle would hire pursuers once they discovered she was gone. She had to get far away before that. After walking a long distance, she groaned in pain, leaning against a tree. Her legs hurt, but she knew she couldn't stop. She forced herself to take a few more steps, though her vision blurred. She remembered Rex back in the garden, how she rubbed his back and his coughing stopped. She smiled, telling him everyone said her hands were warm and soothing. Rex had looked into her eyes, seeing a reflection of her father, and said it was nothing. He thanked her, smiling, and told her his name was Rex. She had called him by his name, and he had chuckled, saying he felt much better. Laura opened her eyes to the morning sunlight. She couldn't believe she had dozed off here. How long did I sleep, she wondered, amazed at how nostalgic the dream had felt. Sitting on the ground, she thought about how shocked Rex would be if he saw her now, looking so shabby. Looking at the sunlight, Laura said really wanted to see him again, and then wiped her face and muttered to herself that she had regained some strength and needed to hurry into town. Standing there, she didn't notice two figures quietly approaching from behind. Oh no, my poor baby. I hope nothing bad happens and she doesn't get caught. Finally, she reached the town. People bustled all around and she breathed a sigh of relief. She had made it. Now, with eyes wide, Laura mumbled she was really hungry and hadn't eaten anything since last night. Her legs had reached their limits too. Just then, she heard a voice asking if she was in some kind of trouble. On turning, it was two young men who looked like troublemakers. She wondered who they were scaredly, and one of them suggested showing her around the town. She thanked him, saying no, but before she knew it, they grabbed her hand, asking her not to be shy. We'll take you to a tasty place. She struggled, shouting for them to let go of her, and immediately a voice came shouting at them, "Take your hands off her!" Laura slowly opened her eyes, confused, and turned to see who it was. It was a young man covered in black from head to toe. Oh my! This should now be renamed Laura's Life Outside the Susbelieve Mansion. Don't touch her with those dirty hands, the man in black said angrily, leaving Laura completely shocked. Before she knew it, the man came forth and blocked Laura from the men, shouting that he was with her, suggesting they leave quietly without causing a scene. Laura panicked, wondering why this young man was suddenly lying like that. The men laughed, and one of them asked what he had just said and told him not to mess with them because they could easily take her by force. Hearing that, he pushed our girl behind him, then coldly said, "It seems there was no room for negotiation." The men freaked out. The other whispered to his bro to let go because this guy's aura was really strange and not ordinary. "You don't step back right away," the men interrupted him immediately before he took action, saying they quit so he should get rid of that killing intent. Laura was surprised and wondered what they meant by killing intent. She wondered if this oppressive feeling coming from this guy is really what they called killing intent. Those men ran off immediately, and Laura bowed, grateful that he helped her. He asked if she was hurt anywhere, but she told him she was fine, thinking to herself, this person had just helped her. He smiled, saying he was flustered and didn't expect her to move this quickly into the city. Laura was confused and wondered what this young man meant by her acting quickly. This guy is definitely the prince. How did he even know she'd move? He realized what he had just spouted out and began faking a cough. Laura watched confused and said, "This is embarrassing." The man pointed behind her, and she turned. He told her he was currently staying on the secondary floor of the building, and below it was a restaurant. Looking at it, Laura could tell that it was an inn. The man, whose face was still covered, asked her to come with him. She glanced at him and agreed. Inside, she was served with plenty of hot dishes all around, and she excitedly stated that they all looked delicious. He asked her to go on and eat, but she suddenly refused. She couldn't just accept food from a stranger. Silly Laura. Her expression when she saw the food at first says otherwise. The place fell silent when her stomach rumbled, and he laughed. She couldn't believe her stomach had chosen to embarrass her at this moment. She mumbled for it to calm down, and he told her it seemed her stomach was more honest. She smiled, apologizing for that. She stared at him, thinking to herself she couldn't believe she ended up following someone she didn't know and giving in to hunger. She could tell that he seemed so suspicious. He noticed her looking and cleared his throat and asked if by any chance she found him suspicious. He slowly took off his covering, apologizing. Laura, on seeing his actual face, was surprised, and her cheeks turned red because of how handsome he looked. So it's actually the prince, huh? This is really getting interesting. Laura was amazed at how handsome he was, with such beautiful eyes too, but froze immediately. She knows someone with eyes as beautiful as his. Judging by the way she was looking at him, he asked if there was something on his face, but she smiled and said no. At that moment, she suddenly remembered the eyes of the boy she met 7 years ago when she was young, Rex. His eyes were just like his. It's so unfortunate that she didn't recognize him. He didn't change much from childhood. Though his eyes were so beautiful, she knew she had to be cautious as a fugitive. "My name is Alex. What is yours?" he asked calmly. She hesitated, thinking to herself she needed to hide the fact that she ran away so she couldn't tell him her name was Dolores. He was waiting for her to say her name, confusedly, and she told him her name was Laura. "My name is Laura. Should I call you Lord Alex?" she asked, smiling. Alex stared at her quietly and shook off his gaze in confusion. Laura was confused and called him Lord Alex, worriedly. He cleared his throat, cheeks turning red. He told her it was nothing. She was surprised. She thanked him for the meal after she was done, and he chuckled, saying she had quite an appetite, asking if her hunger had been satisfied. She smiled, saying yes, and that was all thanks to him. He chuckled, saying he'd like to see her keep enjoying her meal. Laura was confused and asked what he meant by keep watching her eat. He panicked immediately and began coughing nonstop nervously. She called out to him, worried, and asked if he was all right. He stood, saying he needed to excuse himself and would return soon. Confused, she rose and called after him as he left. He went to the backyard, coughing violently, clutching his chest. "We finally met," he murmured. Laura rushed after him, calling his name. She touched his forehead and realized he had a terrible fever. She told him he needed to go back and rest immediately, but he just smiled, saying he was fine. She glared at him coldly, asking what he was even thinking. He should just go to his room and lie down. "Wait, Laura," he called out desperately as she tried to help him. She didn't listen, leaning him against herself and moving forward. He had no choice but to calmly let her guide him inside. Reaching his room, she laid him down on the bed and tried to ease his headache with water and a handkerchief. She placed it gently on his forehead and asked if he was all right. She wondered aloud why he would help a stranger like her when he was in such a condition, and urged him to take better care of himself. He just smiled, then reaching out his hands to her, asked if he could trouble her one more time. He wanted to hold his hands, just for a little while. She was confused, but agreed without a single negative thought. She held his hands, and he smiled, thanking her. She was touched by how bright he looked despite his pain. She muttered to herself, feeling oddly unsettled. Why was she feeling like this? Something about him was throwing her off balance. Back at the Susbelief mansion, Dory had returned and couldn't wait to brag about everything to Laura and make her miserably jealous. "I'm home," she shouted as soon as she entered the room, only to be met by the other maids. She glared at them and suddenly demanded to know where that pathetic lady was and why she hadn't come to greet her. When they told her Laura had disappeared, she erupted in anger, yelling at them in frustration, demanding to know what they had been doing. They apologized, but Dory was furious. She thought bitterly to herself. The woman who was supposed to be confined in this mansion until her debut as Dolores had disappeared? Where did she go? Dory glared angrily. The head maid rushed in, trying to calm her and apologize for their insufficient surveillance. She assured Dory that pursuers had already been sent to search for her. "That pathetic woman will soon be found," the maid whispered strangely. All the servants had grown just as wicked as their master. It's quite a shame. Meanwhile, in town, Laura tended to Alex carefully. Alex thought to himself how worried she had been about him. The moment he woke up and saw her there, he realized she was still worried, but she didn't know he cared about her even more than his own health. He wanted to see her once more, wanted to protect her, to save her. "Lord Alex," she called worriedly. He thought to himself that he had no choice but to do what he did. What exactly had the prince done to bring her back in time? Alex couldn't forget the despair of that night when Dory had introduced herself as Dolores Susbillaby at the engagement. He had known immediately she was an imposter, stealing the real Dolores' identity. He understood the cruel fate that awaited the real Dolores. While Dory foolishly paraded herself, he had looked away and clenched his hands in frustration. He couldn't believe he hadn't noticed sooner. He was so angry that even Dory could feel it. "Who are you?" he demanded, terrifying her. She claimed to be Dolores, but he pointed at her angrily, demanding she stop speaking lies. He called her an imposter in front of everyone, shocking her family. "Lord Alex," Laura called out, and he snapped back to the present. So that was what had happened at the party after they poisoned Laura. If only she knew all this, if only she knew her beloved knew the truth. Alex smiled when he heard her call and immediately answered. He held her hand tightly and hugged her. She froze in surprise. He actually called her by her name and got her confused. This was the first time a man had hugged her like this. Alex asked if she had somewhere else to go after this, and she blinked, unsure what to say. Then he explained, softly but firmly, that he wanted to help her. "I can't just leave you when you're in trouble," he said, leaving her stunned. He pulled back from the hug quickly and admitted, a little awkwardly, that his health wasn't strong. Laura's eyes widened. He had a weak health condition? Alex then told her he was the manager of the shop and inn. She was shocked. "Really?" she asked. He smiled and asked what she thought. Then, almost shyly, he asked, "If you don't mind, would you like to work in this restaurant and take care of me?" Laura's surprise deepened. He added hesitantly that having her by his side would make him feel better, so if she hadn't decided where to go, she should think about it. Laura, still confused, asked what he meant by feeling better when she was around. "That's right," he said, and then asked her to touch his head and see for herself. She did and confirmed his fever was gone. Alex chuckled, saying it was all thanks to her, then teasingly asked if whenever he felt unwell again, would she hold his hand and nurse him? Laura was shocked. The idea of holding hands felt strange. Before she could respond, he hugged her again without asking, saying that part was the most important. "From now on, would it be all right if I hugged you like this?" Asked. Laura's shock grew, so it didn't stop at holding hands. This prince is so straightforward. He doesn't want to waste time and wants to spend every moment holding her close. I love it. The next day at the restaurant, Laura resumed work serving customers cheerfully. The madame in charge of dishes kept calling out to her non-stop because there were so many deliveries to tables. Laura thought, this is exhausting, but she kept going. Meanwhile, someone was watching her through the window, eyes fixed on her every move. Elsewhere in the town, the pursuers met with the two young men who had once tried to harass Laura. The men confirmed they had indeed seen an unfamiliar girl. What was she wearing? The pursuers asked. They replied that she fled from the forest and her clothes were extremely dirty. The pursuers exchanged glances. Their leader immediately commanded them to split up and search. He said he would check the inns while the other two searched clothing stores and the stagecoach station. Before leaving, he handed the two men a token of money, thanking them for the information. Back at the restaurant, Laura was washing plates, grateful to Lord Alex for arranging this work and shelter for her. At this point, I really don't know what His Highness is thinking. Why wouldn't he just tell her who he is and free her from all this suffering? Laura couldn't believe she now had the strange mission of looking after Lord Alex, always asked to touch his head, and he was too cute for her to refuse. Finally done, the madam praised her and told her to rest. Laura gratefully accepted. Poor girl. She used to wash plates in the mansion, constantly made to re-wash even when they were spotless. She slipped out the back door, but she didn't notice someone following her. When she realized it, she turned cautiously and asked who was there. Back at the restaurant, the leader of the pursuers appeared, striding in with authority. The madam frowned, telling him they were closed for the day. "Or are you staying the night?" she asked. He shook his head sharply. "I'm not a customer," he said clearly. "I'm looking for someone. Have you seen a girl from out of town dressed in a maid outfit, looking a bit dirty?" The madam hesitated, puzzled. I wonder if I have," she said. The man's patience snapped. He shouted at her, warning her not to play games. Just then, the other pursuers stomped in, reporting that an urgent message had arrived from the mansion. The leader's eyes widened as he grabbed the letter. Opening it, he was visibly shocked. The others pressed for details, and he told them they had been ordered to return immediately. One of them muttered, "Must be another tantrum from the young lady." They all knew it didn't matter. The order was the order, and they had to obey. Before leaving, they turned to the madam, apologizing for the intrusion. She glared at them as they disappeared back into the forest. Was that letter really from the mansion? Dory wouldn't throw a tantrum just to have them come back for her dog. Meanwhile, the girl's mysterious follower wasn't who she feared. It was Alex. He slipped behind her quietly, wrapping his arms around her in a gentle hug as she turned. "How's work going?" he asked, voice soft and teasing. Laura smiled, feeling warmth spread through her. "There's still a lot I'm not used to, but it's enjoyable. I'm learning." She glanced up at him, silently thanking him for introducing her to this life. They were so close that she could feel his presence completely. His eyes locked on hers, and she felt herself growing shy, quickly looking away. His face, it's beautiful today too, she thought. "Laura, why are you looking down?" he asked, a playful edge in his voice. She stuttered, caught off guard. He leaned closer, voice low and soft. "I just wanted to see your cute face." "Cute face?" she repeated, stunned. "Yes," he said, smiling. "You're cuter than anyone else." Her cheeks burned. "Where were you?" she asked, panic mixed with curiosity. "I was watching you while you worked," he said, laughing softly. "Even though you're not used to it, you kept smiling, happily. It was beautiful." Laura felt her entire face turn crimson. She wondered how he could say such things so effortlessly. "No matter what anyone says, Laura, you're the best woman," he whispered, pulling her tight. She scoffed nervously. "Stop exaggerating." He turned her gently, looking deep into her eyes. "I'm not exaggerating," he said, brushing her cheek softly. "I like you just the way you are." Did he just confess to her? Laura froze, heart racing. "He likes me?" she thought, glancing at him, a new question forming in her mind. Could he really be Rex from her childhood? Her cheeks were flaming, her breath catching, and she realized he was leaning closer, almost kissing her. This is really going so fast, and I like it. Alex, while gently touching her face, told her that he no longer wanted to live with regrets. Laura was confused. She wondered what he meant by regrets. He explained that he was tired of losing people without ever truly saying the things that mattered most. That was why he wanted to say it now, while he still had the chance. Laura's eyes widened in shock as she suddenly realized he was right, because even she had never told her mother and father that she loved them. Judging by the way Alex spoke and the way he held on to her, she could tell that he must have lost someone very important to him. Before he could fully understand what was happening, Laura hugged him tightly, overwhelmed with emotion. Alex was startled by her reaction and softly called out to her name. She sighed and admitted that she didn't know why she was doing it, but in that moment she simply felt compelled to. "Was it not okay?" she asked quietly. As she pulled away, he quickly grabbed her shoulder and exclaimed that it wasn't like that at all, and that he genuinely welcomed it with his whole heart. He added that he would gladly like another helping. which made her pause in surprise as she asked what kind of helping he meant. Back at the Suspillaby mansion, Dory shouted furiously at the pursuers, demanding to know why all of them had returned together just to give a report. She angrily questioned why they hadn't left some men behind to continue the search. The pursuers stood in silence as she yelled at them, calling them all useless. She screamed for them to capture that sluggish woman immediately. One of them tried to respond, saying they were already doing so, but their leader cut him off at once. Dory glared coldly at him and asked if he was implying that he would not follow her orders. The man dropped to his knees at once, swearing that he would return to the search immediately. Dory watched them leave, still seething with anger. She chewed on her fingers in irritation, muttering that her debut was approaching very soon. As she walked down the hallway, she reassured herself with confidence that Prince Alexander would love her, not the real Dolores. Clenching her fist, she firmly convinced herself that she would surely be happy in the end. 2 weeks later, Laura went to Alex's room and slowly opened the door, quietly excusing herself as she stepped inside. She called out to him, telling him that it was already morning. She walked over to the window, opened it wide, then dropped a bowl of water on the floor. Turning toward the bed, she wondered why he had not responded to her voice at all. She watched him as he slept and suddenly felt her cheeks grow warm. Even while asleep, he looked so gorgeous and cute. She quickly panicked at her own thoughts, reminding herself that she was there to wake him up, not to start admiring him. Laura grabbed the blanket and tried to pull it up gently while telling him to wake up. To her surprise, he opened his eyes immediately. For a moment, they simply stared at each other. He smiled and called out to her, and as she leaned closer, she silently thanked goodness that he had finally woken up. Before she could react, he pulled her closer to himself. Their faces were so close that it felt like they were about to kiss. Laura instantly freaked out and apologized, saying she would move away at once. However, he did not allow her to leave. Instead, he hugged her tightly and held her in his arms. She became extremely nervous and wondered what kind of position they were in. Alex softly told her that it felt nice. Laura could not help thinking that an unmarried man and woman lying on a bed like this was not right at all. She felt confused and wondered what on earth was happening. "Alex, this isn't okay," she shouted as she looked up at him, asking him to let her go. He held her even tighter and said that he would not let go. At that moment, Laura did not know what was wrong with Alex, but one thing was certain: his voice sounded very sad. She was shocked when she realized that his breathing had become slow and steady. She could not believe that all those words had been spoken while he was asleep. After a while, Lord Alex finally woke up and immediately started apologizing for falling asleep again. He complained sadly that he had ended up treating her roughly. Laura, who was now sitting on a chair beside him, smiled and said it was nothing like that. Even though her heart felt like it was about to explode, she told him that she was fine now. He called her name with a sulky expression, and she could not stop herself from blushing. He looked exactly like a puppy begging for attention, she thought to herself. As he moved closer, she panicked when she saw her expression. He quickly told her not to misunderstand and think that he acted like this with other women. Laura realized he had caught her red-handed. He anxiously grabbed her shoulders and said that he only behaved this way with her alone. His grip was firm, and his face showed complete honesty. Surprised, she called out to him as Lord Alex. He immediately corrected her, telling her to just call him Alex. She looked confused, but he repeated himself, saying he did not want her to call him Lord Alex anymore. "Alex?" she called out in shock. He smiled warmly at her. Back at the palace, Quan asked His Highness where Laura was. Alex glanced at him and asked if it was truly okay for him not to be by her side. He sighed and said that if it were possible, he would stay with her forever, but his official duties would not allow it. Quan smiled and asked if he was worried about Lady Laura, adding that he should not be concerned because she was with the former captain of the Night Order and the head of the palace, Lulu. Alex smiled and said they seemed to have gotten along much faster than he had expected. Quan laughed and pointed out that His Highness was smiling. Alex quickly tried to hide it. "Quan, why do you look so happy?" Alex asked with a slight frown. Quan chuckled and replied that he was simply happy to see him spending time with the woman he loved. Alex sighed and returned to business, asking about the couple who were acting as the head of the house and had gone to Suspillaby. Quan explained that he had sent his men to watch their every move. Alex looked pleased and then asked about the records concerning the former Duke of Suspillaby and his spouse. Kwan handed him a document saying that the details about the Count and Countess Tina Frere coming to the royal capital had been fully compiled. Alex remarked that they had hardly ever left their territory before, and Kwan agreed. His Highness then muttered suspiciously to himself, wondering if the man had truly been involved in the accident. Kwan reminded him that the accident had happened 5 years ago, so it would be difficult to find many testimonies from that time. Alex smiled calmly and said he would still investigate it. Kwan sighed quietly to himself, muttering, "Good grief," knowing he had no choice but to obey. Back at the Suspilame mansion, the leader of the pursuers reported that they had searched the entire town but could not find her. It seems she was being sheltered somewhere, making it difficult to locate the woman they were looking for. Dory yelled, asking if he was joking with her. How could he return again with such useless report and lame excuses? The maid quickly interrupted, reminding her that the man had not finished his report yet. Her lady sighed and coldly told him to continue. He explained that they had received information from one servant who confirmed that a suspicious individual had been snooping around the Lord's vicinity, and that the person appeared to be of quite a high status. Dory was surprised and immediately demanded to know who it was. The man hesitated and asked if her lady truly did not know who it could be. He then revealed that it was the heir of the Marquis Lovino family, Kwan Lovino. This is bad. Dory was shocked and asked why would he do such a thing. The maid leaned closer and whispered that even during his previous visit he had behaved strangely, which means he had already been suspicious of her. Dory froze, then slowly realized that the wretched woman might be hiding under Lord Kwan's protection. Her frown gradually turned into a grin as she thought to herself that she had finally found her. This is so annoying. Why would Kwan even snoop around the acting duke himself, even after sending people? He practically blew their cover. That same day, Alex returned home and Laura warmly called out to welcome him. Alex looked sad and gently reminded her that he had told her to call him just Alex, not Lord Alex. She panicked, quickly remembering, and corrected herself awkwardly. He smiled when he heard his name properly. Before she could react, he stepped closer and pulled her into his arms. Her face instantly turned red, and she nervously asked what was wrong. He exhaled and said he was tired and thought she could heal him. "Heal you?" she asked in confusion, and he replied that she was his comfort zone. Just then, the brooch on her neck began to glow, catching Alex's attention. He pulled back slightly and held her shoulders, asking about the brooch she was wearing. Laura smiled softly and said it was her mother's memento. Alex was stunned and couldn't believe that Laura possessed it. She noticed his strange expression and called out to him, but he could only think to himself that she still did not know the true value of the brooch. It was already late at night when a carriage carrying Kwan traveled along a lonely road. Kwan complained about having to come out in the middle of the night just to deliver a report about the Suspilame couple's accident. He smiled to himself, mumbling that when it came to that person, His Highness showed no mercy at all and could even pull an all-nighter. Suddenly, Kwan noticed a movement behind him. He frowned, wondering if he was mistaken, and looked around but saw nothing. Hidden in a dark corner, the pursuers observed him closely. Seeing his presence at such a late hour, they found it extremely suspicious and concluded that it might be a secret meeting. They decided to wait and watch, planning to attack the moment their target woman appeared. After Kwan entered the restaurant, the pursuers followed in. Laura and the former knight commander immediately turned toward them. He informed them that the place was closed for the night, but the pursuer's eyes widened in shock when he saw her lady. Her lady was confused, wondering why he was staring at her like that. "A woman with golden hair and emerald eyes! We've found you!" they shouted, pointing directly at her. Panic filled her as she realized these might be the pursuers sent after her. She immediately turned and ran, knowing she had to escape. They yelled for her to stop, and their leader chased after her while the other two were attacked by the knight commander. The pursuers shouted angrily at him, demanding to know why he was interfering. Meanwhile, Laura climbed the stairs, trembling as she realized she had been discovered. She bumped into Kwan and quickly apologized. When she looked up and recognized his face, she was startled. She remembered him clearly as the one who had visited the Duke's house before, Lord Kwan. Hearing footsteps approaching from behind, she turned in fear. It was Alex, rushing up the stairs and calling out to her anxiously. She cried out to him, begging him to help her. As the pursuer reached them, Alex and Kwan immediately stepped forward and blocked Laura. Behind them, the knight commander was still beating the other two, though one pursuer managed to break free and climb up. Laura hid behind Alex and Kwon, shaking in fear. Kwon demanded to know what was going on. The pursuer coldly explained that the woman they were protecting was someone House Susbelieve was searching for, and they should hand her over at once. Laura trembled, realizing that he truly was a pursuer. Alex calmly told Laura to step back, but the pursuer shouted that he was acting under the orders of the Duke of Susbelieve's proxy, so they had better move aside. Proxy of the Duke? Alex repeated, turning to look at Kwon in surprise. Laura tried to explain, calling out to Alex, but he smiled gently and told her it was fine because he already knew her situation. Laura was confused. What did he mean by that? Had he known from the beginning that she was being pursued by the Duke's family? Kwon then spoke confidently, telling the pursuer that they were currently inspecting the territory and that the Duke of Susbelieve could not have issued such an order. The pursuer knew he had been exposed, especially since the orders had come directly from the young miss. Alex smiled calmly and remarked that it was truly unfortunate for him to be at such a disadvantage now. The pursuer turned around and saw that his men had already been beaten into a helpless state by the shop owner. Alex confidently explained that the shop owner was once a knight commander, so it should not come as a surprise. Laura herself was stunned by this revelation. Furious, the pursuer pulled out a dagger and lunged forward, attempting to attack them. The knight commander immediately chased after him, calling out to His Highness. Laura froze in shock. At the same time, Kwon stepped forward and blocked His Highness, telling him to stay back. He seized the pursuer's wrist and twisted it sharply until the dagger fell to the ground. Laura was completely confused. She did not understand what was happening, nor why Kwon and the shop owner were addressing Alex as His Highness. If the shop owner was truly a former knight commander, why would he call Alex that? And Alex saying that he already knew her situation now felt even stranger. So many thoughts raced through her mind, but one question stood out above all others. Who exactly was he? The only person in the country addressed as His Highness was Alexander Duramix. In the middle of her confusion, Alex turned toward her and walked closer. As he approached, Laura kept thinking to herself, could it really be him? The man she had never seen? The man she had only exchanged letters with? As their eyes met, her heart pounded. Could he truly be her so-called fiancé? The pursuers who chased after Laura were soon arrested. Watching everything unfold, Laura finally accepted the truth. Alexander Duramix, the crown prince and her fiancé, was none other than Lord Alex. Later, Laura returned to the kitchen and began warming some milk, carefully pouring it into a cup. When Alex walked in, he asked what she was making. She smiled softly and said she was preparing hot milk to help him warm up. Hearing that, he smiled and stepped closer. Before she could react, he gently took her hand, and the next moment he held her from behind. She called out to him in confusion, and he asked quietly if it was wrong to hold her for a little while. Before she could respond, he kissed her shoulder, causing her to gasp softly. He whispered her name, saying he loved her. He suddenly paused and corrected himself while still holding her, calling her by her real name, Dolores Suspilibe. Laura was stunned. She turned around immediately, and he smiled, calling her his fiancée. She was so shocked that she could not bring herself to meet his eyes. She stuttered, trying to explain why she had hidden her name. He gently told her it was fine and that he already knew everything. Once again, she was surprised. Alex touched her face tenderly and said he knew about the cruel treatment she had suffered at the hands of her uncle, his wife, and her cousin. Laura's emotions overflowed and she avoided his gaze. Seeing her turn away, Alex looked saddened and apologized for making her feel so lonely. He told her it was not because he found her annoying or because he lacked interest in her. Laura quickly interrupted him, saying she already knew the reason. It was because of his illness. Alex admitted that he had always wanted to reach out to her, but his illness had held him back. Holding the cup of milk, he explained that his body never moved the way he wanted, and because of that, he ended up abandoning her. With a pained expression, he apologized sincerely. Laura immediately hugged him, catching him off guard. She told him that compared to her own suffering, he had endured so much more over the years. Tears began to fall before she even realized it. Alex was surprised and asked if she was crying, then held her tighter, promising that he would never let her go again. Seeing the sadness in his eyes, Laura softly called his name. Before she knew it, his lips gently met hers. Wow, things are really happening so fast. They kissed again, and Laura felt an overwhelming happiness, as if she had returned from the dead. She slowly pulled away from the kiss, but Alex held on to her, unwilling to let go. As she leaned against him, she could not help thinking about carrying His Highness's luggage together with him. She suddenly remembered what her father had once told her, and realized that he had indirectly spoken about Alex's illness back then. Looking at Alex with firm determination, she told him that she would support him. Alex was surprised by her words. She continued saying, although she might not have much to offer, he should allow her to help him carry his burdens. Alex could not hide his joy anymore. He immediately hugged her tightly, holding on to her as if he was afraid she would disappear. Wrapped in his warm embrace, our girl now made the tough decision. Her uncle, her aunt, and Dolly, she would take back everything they had stolen from her. Only then could she finally live happily with Alex. As she resolved herself, the brooch around her neck began to glow once more. What kind of power could be hidden within this brooch? Our girl called out to Alex and told him that she wanted to take back what those people had stolen from her. Her expression was so confident that it surprised him. He sighed and said she was truly unbelievably oblivious. Gently patting her head, he told her there was nothing wrong with asking for help. Laura was deeply touched. Smiling, he told her that they would take everything back together, her life as Dolores Suspillabe. Laura's cheeks flushed red, and without warning, she lifted herself and pulled him into another kiss. Wow, we really deserve to watch this. Later, Laura discovered that Alex had been secretly investigating her uncle. He admitted that doing so was somewhat out of line, but he had uncovered something important. He handed her a document, and she was shocked to read that her uncle had taken the position of guardian over Dolores, while still calling himself the acting head of the House of Dukes Suspillabe. Alex told her there was nothing natural about it, and since it had been officially recognized, they couldn't pursue them directly for now. So it's hard to go after them? Laura asked sadly. Alex shook his head and told her they could use the impersonation against them instead, since they were faking the identity of the daughter of the Suspillabe ducal estate. Laura suddenly realized the truth. Just because her cousin's face looked similar to hers, they decided to use her to impersonate Dolores. Alex slammed his fist on the table angrily, saying it was completely insane. Laura called out to him in surprise, but he glared back and said he already had a plan. He explained that Dolly, Tina Frere, the daughter of a count, impersonating Dolores Suspillabe, the daughter of a duke, would be exposed in a public place. Laura was stunned and asked what he meant. He told her that by doing so, they could also drag down the acting heads of the house. Laura clenched the document tightly, realizing just how far Alex had gone to create such plans for her sake. Seeing her expression, he asked if something was wrong or if she saw a flaw in his plan. She shook her head and told him that was not the case. Instead, she remembered that there had been a time when her uncle went to the territory because of the people's request. Alex chuckled, and Laura was shocked to realize that he had been the mastermind behind that as well. She was so amazed that she could only think to herself that she knew it. Smirking, Alex said that when the people's voices are joined with the voice of the royal family, no matter how much they hate it, they are forced to show their faces. Hearing this, our girl asked if he had known she would escape if he did that. After all, it could not be a coincidence that she met a former knight commander as the shop owner and even a head maid after escaping. Alex calmly told her that he had planned everything from the start, including sheltering her the moment she arrived in town. Laura was shocked as another realization hit her. She asked if the reason he stayed at the inn and pretended to manage the place was all because of her. Alex stood up and walked toward her. Before she could react, he hugged her gently. She asked him why he had gone that far for her, pulling back slightly and pointing out that they had never even met before, yet they understood each other so well. Alex looked at her and said he wanted to protect her this time. This time? Laura asked in confusion. He replied that he would do so even if it meant sacrificing himself. He leaned in and kissed her again, and she failed to notice the unease hidden in his words, as well as the true meaning behind them. Why is is Alex not mentioning that they actually met in the palace's children, and why is she not realizing it either? Back at the Suspillaby mansion, Dolly yelled at Susanna, demanding to know if she still had not found the girl. She also asked about the lead suggesting that Laura might be hiding with the help of the Marquis Lavino family. Susanna sighed and replied that they still had no information and that it was very likely the pursuers they sent had been captured. Dolly screamed in disbelief, asking how that was even possible. She cursed Laura for abandoning her duties and running away, questioning how the pursuers sent to capture her could have failed. Before Susanna could respond, Dolly shouted at her, calling her utterly useless and incompetent. Susanna glared back at her coldly. Dolly panicked and snapped, asking what that insolent look in her eyes was supposed to mean. Well, her maid really learned from her. Dolly glared back at Susanna, then suddenly broke into a smile as she called her by name. "What is it?" Susanna asked cautiously. Dolly replied coldly that if Susanna had any complaints, she should go speak to her father and get herself fired. Hearing that, Susanna immediately bowed her head and said she would arrange for new pursuers at once and locate that foolish girl's whereabouts. Dolly burst into loud laughter, mocking her and calling commoners pathetic. "It must be really hard to survive if you get fired, right? No wonder you're so desperate," as Susanna turned to leave. Susanna paused at the doorway and shot her lady a dangerous glare, one filled with murderous intent. Oops, if Dolly isn't careful, this maid might really ruin her. The next morning, the acting duke and his wife returned from their inspection. As expected, the servants and their daughter were lined up outside to welcome them. Her father smiled and warmly called out to her daughter, saying, "I'm back," he asked. "Has there been any changes while I was away?" Dolly lowered her head sadly, and the duke's smile faded at once. He asked what was wrong, and she began to speak, mentioning that foolish Dolores. Before she could finish, the duke interrupted her sharply, asking, "What are you talking about? What happened to Dolores?" His wife suddenly panicked when she noticed that Dolores was not standing among the maids. In that instant, they both realized what must have happened. She told him in a trembling voice that the girl was gone. The duke grabbed her arm and demanded to know if that stupid girl had actually run away. Dolly lowered her head again, sad, and the duke gritted his teeth, asking what on earth everyone had been doing. He shouted, questioning why that thing had still not been found. "That thing?" Dolly asked in surprise. "Why is she acting like she doesn't call Laura even worse names herself?" The duke exploded in anger, insisting she must have hidden it somewhere, and demanding to know where she could have possibly run off to. At that moment, Dolly realized that her father was clearly searching for something specific. She wondered what a penniless girl like Dolores could possibly possess to make him this anxious. Her teeth clenched in frustration as she realized it must be something extremely important, and she could not believe she had never heard of it before. Her father turned on her angrily, blaming her, and saying that if she had not insisted on seeing him off, that foolish girl would never have had the chance to escape. Dolly yelled back, asking if he was seriously blaming her now. Her mother quickly intervened, telling them both to calm down. She reminded them that Dolores' social debut was approaching, so they needed to think carefully and come up with a plan. The Duke took a deep breath and tried to suppress his anger, agreeing that his wife was right. Dolly called out to her father again, but he ignored her and walked inside, clearly annoyed and exhausted. Watching them leave her behind like that, Dolly felt her anger boil over. Everything about the situation was infuriating. As she walked down the hallway, lost in her thoughts, Dolly bumped into a maid carrying a tray of tea. The cups fell and shattered on the floor. Dolly immediately shouted at the maid, accusing her of not watching where she was going. The maid dropped to her knees and begged for forgiveness, but Dolly fired her on the spot. The maid froze in shock as Dolly turned away without another glance, thinking that every single one of them was completely useless. As she stormed through the mansion, Dolly dismissed every maid she came across, leaving the entire household in chaos. She did not care at all. In her mind, any servant who failed to obey her was utterly worthless. Susanna reported the current situation of the mansion to the Duke, explaining how the young lady's behavior had thrown everything into chaos. The Duke responded coldly, saying that anyone who wanted to leave should simply leave. Susanna was stunned. She could not believe he had truly said that. The Duke then shouted at her angrily, telling her he was busy and had no time for such matters. What worried him far more was where that girl had run off to. They had searched convents and even brothels, yet she was nowhere to be found. Seeing what the Duke was truly concerned about, Susanna glared silently, then turned away and left without another word. A few days later, during breakfast, the butler approached the Duke with a grave expression and informed him that all the servants had quit. For once, some servants with brains. "Yes, master," the butler said respectfully. "There has been a large number of resignations over the past few days." He added that the few servants remaining were not enough to prepare meals. The Duke slammed his hand on the table and demanded to know why the butler had allowed them to quit so easily. The butler calmly reminded him that it was his own order, since he had said that anyone who wished to quit was free to do so. The Duke snapped back, ordering him to hire new servants immediately, insisting that would solve the problem. However, the butler hesitated and informed them that there were no applicants at all. Everyone froze in shock. The butler explained that the maids who have resigned spread word everywhere, and now the Duke would have to take responsibility for the situation. Dolly glared at her father as he angrily blamed everything on that foolish girl. He swore that when they finally found her, she would not escape so easily after causing this much damage. At that moment, none of them realized that things were only going to get much worse. Back at the restaurant, Laura was stunned when Alex told her that she would be staying in the palace from now on. As he packed his belongings, he explained that it was too dangerous for her to continue working there, and that moving to the palace as soon as possible was the safest choice. Laura sighed softly, reminding him that she was just Laura, not Lady Dolores. Alex gently told her not to worry about that and asked her to come closer. She obeyed, though she was confused about what he was planning. He led her into another room, and her eyes widened in shock when she saw what was inside. Before her was a beautiful sky blue ball gown. She stood there in awe, completely speechless. Alex looked at her and asked what she thought, explaining that he had prepared it just for her. Our girl was shocked that it was meant for her, and he even told her to ask Lulu for help if she needed assistance putting it on. He added softly that ever since she arrived, he knew she enjoyed working at the restaurant, and sadly admitted that he felt like he was taking all of that away from her. Seeing the sadness on his face, Laura quickly tried to comfort him. She said that although the time was short, it had been meaningful, and she had truly enjoyed it. Deep down, she thought about how kind Alex was, even giving her such a beautiful dress. She told him that once she had taken everything back, she wanted to start working again. Alex smiled and said she had his full permission. He then reminded her not to forget that she also had a marriage with him. Laura laughed excitedly and agreed, then suddenly froze as she fully processed his words. Her eyes widened as she realized that her true self was Alex's fiancé, and once she reclaimed everything, she would marry Prince Alex without any problem at all. Alex suddenly pulled her into a soft hug, completely catching her off guard. They stared into each other's eyes, then both burst into laughter. They rubbed their faces together affectionately and soon leaned in for another kiss. I must say, these two really enjoy kissing a lot. At the Imperial Palace, a carriage arrived right in front of the grand entrance. The maids lined up neatly, waiting. The first person to step down was Prince Alexander. He then reached out his hand toward his beautiful lady. Laura followed behind, placing her hand in his as she stepped down gracefully in green heels. Everyone was shocked to see them descend from the carriage while holding on to each other so closely. As Laura stood there, she felt a wave of nostalgia. She remembered playing in this palace with her father long ago and the little boy named Lex she had once met in the garden. Alex called out to her when he noticed her spacing out, and she quickly apologized, saying it still felt strange standing there in such a dress. Alex smiled warmly and told her that everything suited her perfectly. He complimented her beauty, and Laura smiled brightly as she thanked him. Unable to resist, Alex suddenly pulled her into a hug right there in public. Laura panicked and asked what he was doing, nervously reminding him that so many people were watching. Alex quickly let go and apologized, saying he got carried away. He's already so used to hugging her whenever he wants. Laura glanced down at her dress once again and remembered how Lulu, the head maid, had carefully dressed her up, making her look like a true noble lady. For the first time in many years, she felt what it was like to live as a young lady of status. After such a long time, she could finally breathe comfortably in clothes like these. A soft smile appeared on her face as she realized she had never thought she would be able to wear something like this again. Just then, a voice sounded from behind her saying that there were no mistakes this time. She turned around immediately. It was Quan. He smiled warmly and addressed her as the young lady of the Dolores Suspilibe ducal house from his memory. "It is you without a doubt, Lady Laura," he said, bowing politely. Laura smiled brightly and called out to him. She also bowed slightly, thanking him sincerely for all his help. Quan replied that he was simply glad she was safe, and that was what mattered most. He chuckled, commenting on how beautiful she looked, and added that she and His Highness truly made a wonderful match. Alex immediately bragged, saying, "There is no one as cute or as beautiful as Laura." Quan scratched his head awkwardly and said that there he goes again, showing his desires so openly. He warned that if he continued like that, he might end up putting Lady Laura off. Prince Alex doesn't hide his feelings at all like other male leads. He always does what he wants, when he wants. However, judging by the smile on Laura's face, Quan was shocked. It was clear that she was not put off by his behavior at all. "Lady Laura, aren't you uncomfortable?" he asked in disbelief. Laura tilted her head and asked what he was talking about. Quan's mouth fell open as he realized that she actually liked such bold displays of affection. He quickly closed his mouth and admitted that they were truly a perfect match. It was obvious that they were heading towards extremely sweet and affectionate days from now on. Alex narrowed his eyes and asked what he had just said, but Quan brushed it off casually. Shifting back to business, the prince asked if there was any news about the acting duke. Quan replied that the man had fallen into serious trouble and that his downfall was happening rapidly. Hearing this, Laura murmured in confusion, wondering what he meant. Quan continued, saying that if they were to deliver the final blow, it should be during Dolly's debut, as it would be the most fitting moment. Alex crossed his arms, resting one hand on his chin, and said, "Finally, the day of reckoning was drawing near." Laura arrived at her room and was so amazed by how beautiful it was.
She was so surprised that he had actually prepared such a wonderful room just for her. She blushed, mumbling to herself that Alex really cared for her deeply. Just then, a knock came at the door. Someone called out to her. She opened it and asked what was wrong. Quan, with a serious and worried look on his face, told her it was His Highness, Alexander. Her lady was shocked. Alex was lying on his bed quietly when Laura and Quan rushed in, worriedly calling out to him. He had locked the door, and Quan told her how they were on official duty when suddenly Alex started coughing violently and collapsed. Laura sat next to him, saying that couldn't be. Quan asked if His Highness had ever had an attack while with her, and she replied sadly that yes, it had happened once. She told him he had looked like he was in so much pain. Laura looked at him sadly, thinking to herself that he must have been pushing himself too hard all this time. She wondered why she hadn't noticed it before. Then she turned to Quan and said that even though the palace doctor had examined him, was it really an illness that could not be cured? Quan replied sadly that yes, it was, and asked her lady if His Highness had spoken to her about his illness. Laura told him it was nothing in detail. He had only said that his body was weak. Judging by the look on Quan's face, she sensed something and asked if he really knew something about Alex's illness. Quan was quiet, and Laura shouted at him, saying he should tell her already so that she could do whatever she could. After a moment of silence, Quan finally spoke up, saying His Highness's illness was said to be one that appeared only in him among the royal family. Her lady was confused, and he explained further. Since Alex is the direct lineage of our country's royal family, he receives a special power, a gift from the gods. However, His Highness's power is said to be the strongest among all generations, and because of that strong power, his body cannot withstand it, which always causes him to fall ill. Laura, in surprise, asked if he was really saying that Alex was suffering because his power was too strong. She asked what kind of power it was. Quan apologized, saying he himself still hadn't been informed about the specific power. Now everything makes sense. Could it be that Alex's power is to turn back time? Laura, looking at how much he was suffering, wondered just what kind of power it could be. She grabbed his hand sadly, thinking to herself that she just wished he would wake up safely. That was all she truly wished for. Quan called out to her lady, and she turned. He asked if she was aware of the duties of the Susbelieb household. She asked in confusion what duties he meant. He told her that it was said a royal who possessed such immense power would always have someone around him with holy ability, and that ability was always provided by the Susbelieb household. Laura was shocked, thinking to herself that her father had such an ability, and now it all made sense why he always visited the palace. That meant he had been there to heal Prince Alex. She glanced at His Highness sadly, thinking that the father who used to heal Alex was now gone. Laura asked what they should do since her father had passed away, and Quan sadly told her that he had been suffering like this ever since then. They all turned in shock when they heard His Highness's voice. He smiled and said they talked too much about unnecessary things. Quan bowed immediately and apologized, and Alex told him it was fine since it was something they would have discussed anyway. He tried to sit up, and her lady asked casually if he really should be sitting up like that.
He smiled and said that thanks to her, he was feeling better. Her lady was surprised and told him she hadn't done anything. Alex held her hands and said she had the healing power to heal him. He explained with an honest expression that the reason he fell in love with her was not because she could heal him. Laura was surprised, and they both stared at each other for a while. At this point, I must say that there is a lot more in this story. Alex told her he wanted her to understand the real reason he fell in love with her, but before he could say it, he began coughing non-stop. Her lady panicked, calling out to him. She became restless and worried, wondering what she should do and how to use her powers. Kwon called out to her, saying her very presence by His Highness's side was already healing him. Her lady yelled, "Isn't there something else she could do to help him?" He told her the only way she could heal him properly was by confessing her feelings to him. What does he mean? They literally kissed, and she wouldn't allow that if she didn't like him. Laura was confused and asked what he meant by feelings. He explained she should confess to His Highness from the bottom of her heart. Alex kept coughing, and she rubbed his back gently, thinking to herself that for her to confess her true feelings, there was only one way. She suddenly pulled his face closer and kissed him on the lips, leaving Alex completely shocked. She held onto his shoulders and grabbed his back, kissing him deeply. Kwon was shocked. Oops, the poor man didn't see that coming. She pulled away from the kiss, her cheeks burning red. She smiled and told him she really loved him so much. She asked him to get better, even if it was just a little. Alex was surprised, and before she knew it, he grabbed her neck and kissed her, too. At this point, Kwon should really leave the room. The two stared into each other's eyes and continued kissing. He held her waist tighter, and she held onto his shoulders. They both fell back onto the bed, and Kwon turned away, leaving the room with a smile, thinking to himself that Laura's powers were truly real. He opened the door and left, while the two of them didn't even notice. These two are really so into each other and aren't hiding it at all. On top of her, Alex told her she didn't know how much he had longed for her every day. He confessed that he had really been pining for her. She was surprised, and he kissed her again, holding her hands tightly. Laura pulled back and asked if his cough had stopped. "Young lady, can't you see his cough has stopped? Why are you asking?" Alex chuckled and said he was fine now, and she replied that she was glad. They kissed again, and she couldn't believe that being close to the one you love could bring so much happiness. After a while, he told her he owed her an explanation. He said he didn't fall for her because of her ability. He reminded her of when they were kids, how she comforted him when he was at his lowest, and how beautiful she looked back then. He held her tighter and said it was only later that he found out she was the daughter of the Duke of Suspalib and possessed the healing power of the family. "I'm telling the truth," he said. She thought about how he had told her at the restaurant when they first met that he planned to hide her in the city from the start. She wondered how they were supposed to have met for the first time in the city when it felt like Alex had known her long before. She wanted to ask him everything, but since he wasn't telling her himself, maybe there was a reason. Seeing how absent-minded she was, he asked if something was wrong. She mumbled to herself that it was better not to force the issue now and that something else was on her mind. She called out to him and looked up, asking if she had to keep kissing him in front of everyone to prove she was the real Dolores Suspalib, the daughter of the Duke. Alex looked at her serious face and suddenly burst into laughter. She yelled at him, saying she was being serious. Alex touched the brooch on her neck and told her she already had the proof right there. Laura was confused, so he explained that it was enough evidence to show she was the true heir of Duke Suspalib. So that's why her uncle, the acting Duke, was so furious about the important thing she ran away with. Laura thought to herself that she never knew the brooch was so important. She remembered how her uncle had stolen it from her in her first life and finally understood why he did that. She held her chest tightly, thinking that the future had truly changed. Those who tormented her would surely face their punishment for what they had done. She told herself she couldn't lose to them and that she didn't want to die again. She called out to Alex and he answered. She told him it was about what Lord Kwon had said earlier about not knowing the true nature of his illness. He said your ability hasn't been disclosed yet, she said. Alex replied that he understood. Laura noticed the change in his expression and wondered if he himself didn't know his power or if there was some reason he couldn't tell her. She told him she wouldn't force him to explain now, but when the time came, she wanted him to share the burden he was carrying. He looked confused and she smiled and said it was because she would soon be his wife. "Wife?" he repeated, then sighed softly. "That actually sounds nice." Laura lit up, touching his face and smiling happily. She said she also wanted to find a way to cure his illness. Alex smiled, thanked her, and hugged her tightly, telling her he loved her. In his arms, she thought to herself that she would stand tall as the true heir of the Susbelieve household, and she would show them everything by Alex's side. Later that night, the maid who was helping Laura take her bath was very lively. She kept talking and said it was really surprising to finally know that the benefactor His Highness had been talking about was actually her. Laura was confused and asked what she meant by benefactor. The maid explained that for His Highness to speak so highly of someone, they had always wondered who that person was. It had even become a constant topic of gossip among the maids. Laura was completely confused, and the maid smiled, saying they were sure His Highness would visit her chambers that night. Laura smiled and said she was actually planning on going to see him instead. The maid's face lit up immediately. She asked if they were really doing nighttime visits. Laura laughed softly and said they would probably call it that. "How unexpectedly bold of you! I'm sure His Highness will be delighted," the maid said with a smile, adding that they would do their best to make sure Laura looked even more adorable. Laura was dressed in her nightwear, and she looked extremely beautiful. She thought to herself that they had polished her so much that she was almost sparkling. Touching her face, she noticed how smooth her skin felt and how nice and soft her scent was. Just then, she heard a knock at the door and wondered who it could be. Alex called out to her, saying it was him. She told him to come in. He opened the door, dressed in his finest outfit, calling her name cheerfully. She was surprised and told him she was just about to come and see him. Before she knew it, he pulled her close and said that wouldn't do. She was shocked as he held her tightly, saying he couldn't let such an adorable Laura walk alone. Her lady shyly asked if she didn't suit him or something, but he replied that she looked so beautiful it was even driving him crazy. She panicked and asked why he was saying things like that again. Alex sighed and said he was an unfaithful prince with a fiancé who had brought another woman into the castle and now was attempting a nighttime visit. "How thrilling," he said with a smile. Alex wondered what he was so amused about. Alex suddenly lifted her into his arms and called her his adorable Laura. He told her how lovely her scent was, and she freaked out, shouting his name. He smiled, still holding her, and asked if it would be okay if he came to see her every night like this. "Every night?" she shouted. At this point, they should just get married again. Seeing how serious he looked, she hesitated to answer, and before either of them realized it, they were already kissing. Quan, who was passing by, locked the door quietly and sighed to himself, thinking these two were enough to give anyone heartburn. He walked away, muttering that it seems these sickeningly sweet days would continue. Back at the Suspillabe mansion, Dolly yelled at her father, saying she couldn't take it anymore. While seated at the dining table, she told him she was truly dissatisfied with their present life. He replied coldly that she must endure it until her debut into society. Then he smiled and said everything would be fine once she was recognized as Dolores. Dolly gritted her teeth and asked if it would really be fine, since the prince hadn't sent a single letter. Before her father could even reply, she shouted that it was obvious her marriage alliance with Alexander only happened because of the royal family's strong wishes. The Duke clenched his fists in anger, thinking to himself that a rumor was now spreading around the palace, that the prince was keeping a certain woman close. Could it be that after neglecting his fiancée, who was bound to him by a promise with the royal family, he was now indulging himself with another woman? The Duke was furious. He also remembered that they had made a fake version of the brooch since they couldn't find the real Dolores or the original one. Dolly wondered what was wrong with her father, and before she knew it, he smiled to himself, thinking that everything would surely work out. He imagined Dolly at her social debut, replacing the real Dolores, and how the ducal estate he had always longed for would finally be his. 1 month later, back at the Suspillabe mansion, Dolly was overjoyed when she found out that Prince Alexander had written a letter to her. Her parents were so happy that they concluded the prince had finally agreed to escort her to the party. Her father told her that if things went as planned, he would introduce her as his fiancée at that very party. Dolly was thrilled, and her mother praised her, saying that was her girl and that everything they wanted was finally happening. Dolly called out to her parents happily, and her father grabbed her shoulders, staring at her with pride. I feel so sorry for them. In their minds, they think they will finally take over and live happily ever after ruining someone else's life. That's truly cruel.
This is where this part of the story ends. If you love this story and you want us to continue, please comment the protagonist's name, Laura.